Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining the Everyday Donors of Color Giving Trends webinar, hosted by CCS Fundraising and the Indiana University Lilly School of Philanthropy. My name is Rui Liu, Senior Vice President at CCS, and I will be moderating today's session. Please note that we will be recording today's program, and we will share the recording with you via email in the coming days. Our goal for today's discussion is to dive into qualitative themes around giving trends of communities of color. Our conversation will stem from the findings from the Lilly School of Philanthropy's report, The Giving Environment. We will discuss the formal and informal ways through which communities of color practice generosity and how nonprofit professionals can adapt their approach to reaching and retaining donors of diverse backgrounds. I'm delighted to introduce our panelists, beginning with Dr. Una Osley. Dr. Una holds the E. Fromson Chair in Philanthropy and is the Associate Dean for Research and International Programs at the Indiana University Lilly School of Philanthropy. She also serves as the Dean's Fellow for the Mays Family Institute on Diverse Philanthropy. A scholar in economics, Dr. Una leads the research and publication of Global Philanthropy Tracker and the Global Philanthropy Environment Index, which collaborate with over 100 experts in more than 90 countries. At Indiana University, she leads the research and publication of Giving USA, the annual report on American philanthropy, and is the founder of Generosity for Life, a digital platform providing a new data tool for financial decision-making in the areas of philanthropy and social impact. Dr. Una also chairs the school's signature research project, the Philanthropy Panel Study, which is the most comprehensive study of the generosity of American families over time. Dr. Una, we're so grateful to continue partnering with you and your team. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Next, we have Prescott Bay, the Chief Partnerships Officer at the Asian American Foundation. She joined from the private sector, where she designed and launched philanthropic and social impact initiatives centered around communities of color and women. Specifically, Prescott oversaw the Gender Diversity and Women's Strategy for the Global Diversity and Engagement Center for Excellence at Pepsi. She currently serves on the boards of the Roger Lehecka Double Discovery Center at Columbia University, the Korean American Community Foundation, The List, a community of high-impact women in media, business, and tech. Welcome, Prescott. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Next, we have Woody Keon, the President and Chief Operating Officer for the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center. With over 35 years of leadership experience on a global level, Woody's backgrounds include serving as an executive of the Procter & Gamble Company. He currently chairs 3 nonprofit boards and is a mentor to young African-American males in underserved K-12 schools in the greater Cincinnati area. Woody, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Rui. It's a pleasure to be with this panel.
Next, we have Lena Park, the Chief Development and Communications Officer at Asian Health Services. With a background in journalism and public relations, Lena brings over 25 years of experience in nonprofit management across diverse sectors. Prior to joining healthcare services, she served as Executive Director of the Korean American Community Foundation of San Francisco. Lena's commitment extends beyond her professional roles. She's an advisory board member at the University of California, San Francisco's CARE program and actively engaged with several community-driven organizations, including the Council of Korean Americans, the Korean American Coalition in the Bay Area, and CHIEF. Thank you for joining, Lena.
Thank you, Rui. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Last but not least, we have Dr. Imari Paris Jeffries, the President and CEO of Embrace Boston. He brings a wealth of experience from nonprofit management, racial equity, community activism, education reform, and social justice sectors to his work. The unveiling of the statue, The Embrace, took place on Martin Luther King Jr. Day in 2023 to honor MLK's legacy. The statue is now a permanent fixture in Boston's public art landscape and a cornerstone representing a commitment to the pursuit of equity and justice for Boston residents and visitors. The Embrace was the result of Dr. Imari's movement-building leadership, which raised dozens of leadership gifts for the Embrace Memorial. Welcome, Dr. Imari.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here this evening, this morning, and this afternoon.
Thank you. So before we jump into the conversation, I would like to turn it over to Dr. Una for an overview of the report findings. Dr. Una, over to you.
Well, thank you very much to all of you who've joined us from all over the country. Again, it's a pleasure to be here. Special thanks to our CCS colleagues for partnering with us on this exciting launch of the report, and also to my colleagues at the Lilly Family School and beyond who've contributed to this project, especially my colleague Satashma Thapa, who will be present for questions throughout the presentation. So today's conversation is centered on donors of color, diverse donors of all backgrounds. This report represents an important first step, and I note just first step, to fully understand the breadth of American giving. When we look at the literature, it is, of course, philanthropy is a part of every corner of this country. It is even a part of our colonial and pre-colonial past in this country. Philanthropy existed. Generosity existed in this country even before it was a country. So there is so much to learn. But when we look at the literature, especially the academic literature on donors of diverse backgrounds, there's a very limited set of findings. And so this project and today's conversation is meant to fill in that gap so that we better understand how donors are giving. We know that our country is becoming even more diverse. And we hope to fill that gap and start to change the narrative so that our communities understand that donors come in all backgrounds from all different types of orientations. And we have data to show that generosity is not unique to any one community, but it cuts across race and ethnicity. And at a time where we're used to thinking about things that divide us, generosity is actually a component of our civic, our social, and our cultural life, an aspect that unites us and brings us together. So on the next slide, I'd just like to also acknowledge a lot of our collaborators on this project, specifically Dr. Stephanie Bodie, Tysus Jackson at the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History, and of course, special thanks to our funders, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. On the next slide, I'd like to just very quickly, lightly touch on the methodology for this project. For those of you who are very enthusiastic about the data, you can dive into the report. It's available on the website and also the infographics. To conduct this study, we rely on 2 national data sets, and we also have several case studies. On the next slide, I'd just like to mention that there are 2 research questions that we'll be organizing our findings around today. The first is, what's happening with the giving landscape, and how do long-term giving trends vary across all the different racial and ethnic groups that we study? In addition to establishing what those baseline findings are, we also look at why these giving rates are varying across different groups over time. And specifically, we identify the role of economic factors, religion, religious affiliation, as well as trust. How do those help explain the giving rates and how they're varying over time? On the next slide, I'd just like to quickly provide a quick overview of the data. Now, as a data enthusiast myself, we could spend all day here, but I'll just mention that this project is based on the Philanthropy panel study. It is by design a nationally representative sample. It includes an oversample of new immigrants post-1968. It also includes an oversample of African-American households and allows us to study more intentionally how race and ethnicity affect the giving rates, the giving amounts, and allow us to study those background variables, you could say, while holding income, wealth, education, and other household characteristics constant. In addition to the Philanthropy panel study, we also rely on the General Social Survey conducted out of the University of Chicago. This study in particular allows us to look at variations in trust over time and by ethnicity and race. On the next slide, just very quickly, I'd like to take us through some of the main findings and implications of the study. Again, I hope that all of you who are joining today will find some time to read the full report, but also if you don't have time to read the full report, we have some infographics on the website that capture some of the summary findings. So very quickly, I'd like to go through the key findings and also what these implications are. The first finding and the most important finding from this project is that all the groups we study have high rates of giving. Giving is one value that is maintained across all the races and ethnicities that we study. In this particular project, we focus on Hispanic donors and Americans, Latinx, Latina, or depending on terminology. We also look at Native American, Indian American households, as well as African American households and Asian American households. I should note that within these broad categories, there's tremendous variation. If we were to pick Asian American households as an example, there are lots of different immigration experiences that are embedded, country of origin differences, religious affiliation. So we understand that there's, of course, much diversity within those broad categories. However, despite all those distinctions, one consistent theme is that all the different race and ethnicity groups that we study have high rates of giving. However, taken together, over the course of the past 2 decades, giving rates have declined across the board. At the beginning of the 21st century, 2/3 of American households gave. Today, that is down to below 50% for the very first time. So as we track these giving rates, we also see that giving rates have declined across all the different groups. We do find variation by income levels, wealth levels, education, marital status, religious affiliation, and the rates of decline have varied across the different groups that we study. Most importantly, economic factors explain a significant share of the decline. In particular, about 40% of the decline in giving rates that we capture over the past 2 decades can be explained by changes in income and wealth over time. However, the other 60% cannot be explained by economic factors alone. And that leads us to other factors that are changing the giving rates. And here, what we've been able to track more closely are changes in trust over time. And what we found is at the same period where we've had economic shocks, including the Great Recession, that trust is also one of those variables that has declined over time. In fact, when we look at the declining rates of trust, we see that among lower income households and also younger Americans, those trust levels across the board have declined. So taken together, these findings suggest that Americans are generous. This cuts across race and ethnicity. Giving is not unique to any one race and ethnicity, and that's a powerful finding. The second finding is giving has declined over time, and we've also looked at why giving is declining. The economic factors, specifically the Great Recession in 2008, had a dramatic effect on giving, especially for communities of color. And when the economy recovered, there was a much slower recovery for a lot of the communities of color that we study. And that also had implications for giving. In addition to the economic factors that undergird these results, we found that non-economic factors were an important part of the story, in particular, trust levels. And as we look at interpersonal trust, another key finding there is that we do find declining trust across the board, but especially, as we noted, for younger Americans and households of many different backgrounds. So on the next slide, we're going to shift gears and quickly talk about the implications. Our team has had, I'd say, over the course of the last few years, lots of opportunity to digest these findings, reflect on these findings, and also share these findings with many of our closest networks, but also with audiences around the country. And the first implication, and probably the one that I think I would say, if you don't take anything else away from this webinar, this one really should stand out. The first is that philanthropy does not have a one-size-fits-all approach. In fact, you could argue that the one-size-fits-all has not worked for a while. But as we look ahead, this country certainly is growing more diverse. Our communities as a whole are growing in terms of diversity measured, of course, by race and ethnicity, but also by religious orientation, country of origin, and so many other types of ways of looking at diversity. As we think about what this means, as we look deeper into our data, communities of color historically have had expansive notions of generosity. Some of that has involved formal engagement with the charitable sector, but it's also involved giving time, volunteering, giving talent, skill-based volunteering, but also giving testimony, using your voice to advance a cause, and social movements. So as nonprofits try to understand what this means for them, the key is going beyond just one approach and understanding what donors need and meeting donors where they are. The second finding is that nonprofits also need to improve their understanding of philanthropic practices within communities of color. In the report, we highlight several case studies in addition to the data, and we also use some examples. One in particular, Dr. Stephanie Bodie provided, talks about the role of faith communities in communities of color, and especially the Black church. This is an example of a philanthropic institution that has actually worked to support historically Black colleges and universities and many other nonprofit institutions within communities. The third implication is, as we think about what these findings mean, we have also noted that communities of color are engaging far beyond the traditional ways of giving. In the report, we find that among Hispanic Americans and also Native communities, there are very high rates of what we call, perhaps in the social science arena, informal giving, person-to-person giving, mutual aid, communities helping each other. And as our times evolve, we're seeing much more giving focused on social movements, broader social movements taking place within the country and even internationally. Philanthropy has an opportunity to better understand all of these trends. One very prominent example, which is also featured in the report, are giving circles, in especially the example we give based in Minneapolis, where again, nonprofits and philanthropy do have an opportunity to partner with these individual organizations and groups. The other implications from this report, as we go to the next slide, are that new forms of giving are emerging within our nation and within our philanthropic landscape. And we're seeing that diverse donors are embracing a lot of these new forms of giving. Some of them involve digital fundraising, recurring donations. And if we think about some of the case studies highlighted in the report, the Smithsonian African American Museum, as an example, uses a diverse array of opportunities to engage diverse donors that includes volunteering, giving monetary contributions, but also membership options where individuals can opt to become members of the institution, which increase the base of stakeholders and communities that engage with the museum and its mission. And then finally, as we think about the report, a lot of the data cited in the report was collected prior to the COVID pandemic. And so as we look ahead, nonprofits, fundraising professionals also need to understand that a lot of what we understood about giving has shifted, and organizations also need to adapt to the needs, the changing, of course, diverse needs of donors, but also of the communities they serve. So I will stop here and of course encourage everyone on the next slide to visit the Lilly Family School website to download the full report and the infographics that are associated. And I'd like to turn it back to the moderator.
Thank you, Dr. Una, to you and your team for your incredible work. We will spend the remainder of our time today hearing from our panelists. So as Dr. Una shared, one of the implications from the report indicated that political and social movements have gained tremendous attention. And for nonprofit professionals working every day with their communities, the effects of these movements and their impact on the communities of color are very tangible, especially during the pandemic. I would love to turn our first question to Priska. Priska, through our work with you at the Asian American Foundation, we've witnessed how effective you and your team work with your board members and donors. Tell us about your work.
Thank you, Rui. Hi, everyone. I'd love to share the journey of the Asian American Foundation with this group. We're a new organization launched just in 2021. And I think it's an interesting story because it tells a story of philanthropy, I think more than it does about sort of the birth of a nonprofit organization. I got a call about the Asian American Foundation in March 2021. We launched in May 2021. And before that, as Rui said, I have spent my career in corporate diversity, corporate philanthropy, mostly focusing on women's issues. And so got a phone call about an organization that was being founded by Asian American business leaders, the founder of Yahoo, the founder of Alibaba, the owner of the Brooklyn Nets, CEOs. And I remember thinking to myself, as an Asian American woman at that time, if we can all take ourselves back to, March 2021 and how we all felt, especially those of us who are Asian American, people of color, especially living in New York City, it was a very scary time for us. For me personally, it was not a great time to be on the streets. I was actually, physically, harassed. And it was this moment where when I heard these leaders were coming together to found an organization for the Asian American community, I felt stronger. I felt more powerful. I felt like it was what our community needed. At that time, I was serving on boards of nonprofit organizations, KCF, the Korean American Community Foundation. And I think for me, I just felt like people needed to step up, and I saw these leaders stepping up. So the Asian American Foundation came about, the board members came together, and they seeded it with $65 million over 5 years. And then we had a national organization focusing on the API community to fight hate and build belonging. That is our mission and vision. The thing that really inspired, I think, the board members and myself was if we were going to do this, we were going to bring every sector along. It's not just philanthropy, it's just not just nonprofit. So we focus on the corporate sector, and we launched something called the AAPI Giving Challenge. We saw a research study conducted by the Asian Americans in Philanthropy, APIP, that said that less than 0.2% of philanthropy had been going to the Asian American community in like the last 3 decades. So we asked every corporate that we can speak to, get on a Zoom, what they were doing for the API community, and if they could tell us what that was over 5 years. And frankly, most of the answers were not enough. I think that for me, as someone who worked in corporate, Asian Americans were rarely on agendas. We were rarely in strategies. We just weren't in budgets. And so for this effort, we just wanted corporates to raise their hand and say that they were going to do something. So in this launch, not only did we launch with the board members, very generous $65 million, we got about 60 corporates, about 40 families, and some foundations to pledge to spend over $1 billion to the AAPI community over 5 years, directly into the community mostly. And so I think for TAF, the Asian American Foundation, yes, we want to fight hate, we want to build belonging, but we really want to create a community of partners, Asian Americans and allies who are going to focus on AAPI issues in a way that we feel like has not been done before. So TAF, 3 years in, we went from 7 full-time staff to 30. We've given away about $25 million in the last 2 years, and we're literally just getting started. So excited to be here.
Thank you so much, Priska. It's been very inspirational to work with you and the team. Thank you for sharing that. Woody, I would love to turn our attention to you. Our team at CCS has really truly enjoyed working with you as well. Please share with us your work at the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center.
Well, thank you, Rui. It's great to be here. Our work at the Freedom Center is dealing primarily with social justice. And we build our work based on the principles of the Underground Railroad. And a lot of people don't know that the Underground Railroad was the nation's first social justice movement. So when you look at movements that have emanated from that, uh, women's suffrage, civil rights movement, Black Lives Matter, and so on and so forth, they emanate and use the principles of the Underground Railroad. 3 principles: courage, cooperation, and perseverance. Any major social justice movement generally has all 3 of those elements involved with it. So we've been in existence since 2004, and a lot of our work deals with social justice in the areas of education, health equity. We focus on criminal justice. We focus on political, and also we're looking into areas dealing with the wealth and economic empowerment inequities that we have in the country. So some of the things that we're looking at here as we think about in terms of the opportunities available to us is that we look at, first of all, you have to look at the wealth gap and how it was created, emanating back from the days of enslavement of African Americans, Africans who came to this country. It created this wealth gap that has existed and been perpetuated for many, many years. But what's happening now, when you kind of look at the landscape in terms of this trend that's happening, as I see it, is that now you're seeing probably the first and maybe second generation of college graduates and other individuals who came along who are now in a position where they can start thinking about having intergenerational wealth and passing that wealth along. It's not enough of us for sure, but there are a lot more people than from a few years or so ago. And what's going on is I'm finding that individuals are out there who have this wealth, who have been accumulated because they've achieved these levels of leadership in various corporate settings, educational institutions, medical, professional, legal fields, and things like that. They're now starting to think about this and get the advice that they need. Some of the challenges we face, I think, were called out in the report. Number one, trust. Some of the trust issues that we've have emanated from our government, some of the trust issues emanating from our religious institutions, it really tarnished a lot of people and have caused a lot of people to feel pretty bad about the situation and have caused them to be very, very careful. So as a result, I think I find more people looking at areas of their lived experience and really trying to have more control and influence and be sure that they develop a relationship with people that they really, really trust before they're really ready to put their dollars on the line. One example I'll share real fast is one of my friends who had made it to, he was first African American to make it to the head of a pretty large corporate family-run business. He was the first non-family member to take control. And after the George Floyd situation murder in a few years ago, he basically decided he has a private family foundation that decided that he had had enough of the police brutality and he wanted more data and he was going to invest in it. So his family foundation put $1 million and started a social justice center in the heart of the city, in the underrepresented area of the city, to try to get more information and to try to take this information to law enforcement officers and institutions around the area here to share the data with them so that we can bring about change. So that's one example. And I know others who are doing similar, but that was one example. And I think that if you tap into the lived experience and what that passion area is, I think we'll find success. Thank you.
Woody, thank you so much. Your point about trust, we will dive into that even deeper. Thank you for bringing that up.
Sure.
Next, Dr. Imari, your work in community activism is truly incredible. Please share with us your work at Embrace Boston.
Hi, everyone. So excited to be here. Embrace is an organization that's at the intersection of art and culture and research and policy. And we concern ourselves with narrative and the way that narrative shapes the way that we think, act, feel a sense of belonging. We are an anti-racist organization, and that's at the heart of what we do. And, I think this conversation of trust is resonating with me in our work every single day. Just to give you an example, I think in the height of 2020, not only were we struggling with misinformation around the impacts of the pandemic and the effects of the pandemic, we were also grappling with the meaning of monuments in our society. There are over 741 Confederate monuments in our country, 210 schools, 7 waterways, over 700 counties and municipalities named after Confederate leaders, up until recently, 10 military bases and 1 commemorative plate. And so in these places where these Confederate monuments and markers exist are also the same states that have also banned women's reproductive rights, books, critical race theory, certain forms of history, all sorts of things, right? And so monuments, holidays, these forms of commemoration are analog cookies. And so if we know digital cookies, and we've all probably been shopping at work and accepted the cookies, closed the window, and then shoe ads came up through the rest of our day through that search. And so monuments work in that same way. And so they remind us subtly of the values, the histories, and the stories of the people that we are memorializing. And so when we're talking about trust, and we think about monuments as analog cookies, and we understand that holidays and memorials and these narratives are a part of how we've been taught history, it's no wonder that I think we're in a moment in time where trust is at an all-time low. And I'll just give you a quick example. In my home state of Massachusetts, and many of us have heard of the Boston Massacre, where the American Revolution started, right? 2026 is the semi-quincentennial. It's the 250th anniversary of our country. So we all know about the great martyr of the the Boston Massacre. You could type it in the chat if you want to, Crispus Attucks. So we all know Crispus Attucks, the first martyr of the American Revolution. But what we don't know is that John Adams was the attorney of the British soldiers who were put on trial after the Boston Massacre. And so their attorney, President Adams, at the time, Attorney Adams, remarked on Crispus Attucks' height. The average American was 5'8", Attucks was 6'2". And so he described Attucks as a stout fellow who could only be subdued by lethal force. And so we've heard this narrative before, right? It kickstarted the Freedom Summer 2020. And so the murder of Crispus Attucks, the subduing of Black bodies who could only be subdued by lethal force, is a narrative that is as American as American pie. And so when you understand these subtle narratives that are embedded in our country, it is easy to see why these stories that many of us grew up, Columbus as this great explorer, that this wayward group of travelers crash landed on Plymouth Rock, and this unknown group of indigenous people held a block party and barbecued a turkey to welcome them in the middle of November. When we hear these stories and these narratives and we find out that they're not true, and that they're the basis of the American epistemology, it's easy to see how trust is eroded in this country. And so this opportunity to tell new stories, to tell new narratives, to build new monuments that represent new values, especially in our 250th anniversary. What will our 400th anniversary look like? What will those monuments, how will they represent us? What type of analog cookies will we build? And so I'm excited about this conversation. I think trust is a theme when we think about philanthropy and the way that we feel comfortable giving to our society. It's an important question, and I'm so happy to be here and have this conversation with these important thinkers and thought leaders.
Thank you, Dr. Murray. The statue, for those of you in the audience that may not know, the statue is based in Boston, and it's big, it's huge, and I've been there one time. And Dr. Murray, I have to say, it made an impact on all of us who visited. I think the process of it took a lot of effort with a lot of people. So for those of you who are based in Massachusetts or have a chance to visit Boston, please do so. As we think about our conversation, and Lena, I'm coming to you next. We learned from Dr. Una earlier that communities of color may have a broader notion of philanthropy, which goes beyond monetary giving. Tell us about your work at the Asian Health Services, and maybe specifically your experience with individual supporters.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much again for having me. And just listening to all the panelists here makes me so excited. I want to actually go to Boston and see that monument as well. So a little about Asian Health Services. We are, this year's our 50th year, so we are middle-aged now and celebrating our 50 years. And what we are is a health center, a federally qualified health center that provides now 50,000 patients with medical, dental, and behavioral services in approximately 14 different languages, 12 of which are Asian. And one of the things that is very unique because we are a federally qualified health center is we have 51% of our consumer board are our consumer board, meaning majority of our patients, approximately 91%, are considered low income. And one of the things that have been very powerful, I believe, in our organization is the amount of value and power that our consumer board actually has in our health center, because they are the voice of the community, and they have a lot of their voice is very magnified, and we value their work, their volunteerism, what they contribute, and it's not all monetary. The other thing is just the staff dedication. We have when we first started about 49 years ago, 50 years ago, we were a storefront clinic, in a sense that there was only 2 rooms, and it was started because of some data research by Berkeley students who found the lack of access of language was preventing many Asian Americans from receiving the healthcare that they actually needed. And now we are a clinic of 12 with approximately 500 staff, and we still have some of our providers. One provider, she has been here since she was the first doctor. And we still have this doctor who's been here for 47 plus years. She was a pediatric provider, and now they are in their 50s and 60s, and they're still going to her. Some of them actually drive 3 hours to see her, and it just shows the impact of community. And we also work from a philanthropic standpoint. We also understand the value of connection as part of giving beyond the monetary. And I love the conversation that we're having about trust, and I cannot wait for us to continue that conversation. I think trust is one area, but also it's connection. And I think the value of just giving around the connection is extremely important, especially amongst the Asian American community. And we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but just in terms of the amount of touch points that you need around philanthropy with the Asian American community is pretty significant, in that building of that trust is important. And so you almost have to double the touch points in a sense of what it actually takes to build that community and to bring them into your community as well.
Thank you so much, Lena. You know, in our work with you and your team, it was very evident to all of us how committed all your volunteers were. When we did the study, you know, the average volunteer number of years was about 20. And all of us were just so, we're total respect. This is wonderful to hear. And it says a lot about your work and your team's work. Woody, you know, I would love to turn it back to you on this idea of a broader notion of philanthropy. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. Well, a couple of things. I think that the study that called out volunteerism, definitely that's a leading area of a broader perspective on philanthropy. And I have a lot of friends, and myself included, who provide a lot of your 3 elements: time, talent, and treasure. I think that the other piece I would like to bring out here is that I think that there's a saying that goes, charity begins at home, so to speak. And I know I have a number of friends who are doing what I would call making indirect supports of philanthropy efforts. They're doing things like investing in startup companies for some of the people to try to drive economic empowerment in the Black community. They're also doing things like helping and providing and payments, down payments, and in some cases paying mortgages to get their children or some loved one into a house that they would never have an opportunity to own, so that they can start building wealth. They're also investing in college education. A lot of people in the African American community just still don't have some of the resources. And so I have a lot of friends, and myself included. I have a nephew that I have put a lot of money into. He's about to graduate from university here next year. But investing in college educations for those who family members who may not have had the opportunity or would not have the opportunity if you were not if they didn't have access to people like myself and my wife, who were able to afford a college education to give them that start that they are going to definitely need going forward. So I think that the key pieces here are basically around volunteerism is a big part of it. But we volunteer on boards and provide our intellectual assets to boards to help people get businesses started. But this indirect philanthropy piece in terms of all the other areas that many people are investing and putting their money in from a philanthropic standpoint. And it's not just for family members, but it's also friends and others who come and seek out help to maybe get a business started, to take a project to the next level, or just to kind of get some of the basic needs met to make it day by day. So those are the two pieces I would like to share with the group.
Thank you. As we reflect on the report, it included a number of case studies that demonstrated different ways donors show their support beyond monetary giving as well. In particular, there is a case study on the National Museum of African American History and Culture. They're also our client, and the museum is very, very thoughtful and intentional about working with their donors. Dr. Una, this is a question for you. Could you talk about how nonprofits, such as the National Museum of African American History and Culture, adapt the concept of philanthropy beyond monetary giving in their fundraising strategies?
Well, thanks so much for bringing that question to the forefront, and also to Woody for sharing the example with the Underground Railroad Museum in Cincinnati, which I've had the pleasure of visiting in person. I'd like to say that in today's world, and we see this embedded in the report, the notion of generosity is so much broader than monetary contributions. In particular, for a long time, everyone has talked about the 3 T's, time, talent, and treasure, but we have 2 additional T's that are particularly important when working with communities of color. We talk about the notion of testimony, using your voice, using your platform. This is very important because today a lot of people learn about nonprofits or causes, not necessarily through reading or on the website, but through social media. In fact, when we look at a percentage that give because they heard or saw something on social media, along with giving via crowdfunding, it's almost up to 40%. So 40% of Americans are giving through social media or through crowdfunding. The other, so testimony, whether you have 1 follower or 1 million followers, you have influence. And so connecting with that testimony component is very important. The other T that's particularly important for communities of color is ties, networks. Many of the organizations, individuals, organizations that we study in the report, as well as individuals, are connected to family, to friends, to communities that are much broader. So connecting to that one individual opens the door to other donors, other supporters, other ways of engaging. Here at Indiana University, we have some very good examples that I'd like to share. In the last few years, we've launched a Women's Philanthropy Council, a BPC, Black Philanthropy Circle, a giving circle for Black African-American donors, a Queer Philanthropy Circle, QPC, and we're about to launch one for Latinx donors. This is especially important because a lot of these are high-capacity donors, but they've never given to Indiana University. The reason it's successful is the peers introduce new donors and also build a sense of community across the university alumni network. The takeaway here for all of you who've joined is that increasingly, as you think about reaching more diverse donors, of course, the talent, time, treasure piece, but think about how to bring the testimony, the voice, the platform that those donors have, and also the networks that those donors have. You will be much more successful in reaching those donors when you have this expanded notion, tapping into how those donors are already giving. Many of them are already involved in different networks and communities.
Thank you, Dr. Una. I think all of what you said at the core of the conversation of the topic is the idea of trust, building trust. So as Woody and Dr. Imari alluded earlier, we would love to take a moment to really open up the floor to our panelists and have in-depth conversation about the notion of trust. Dr. Imari, I would love for you to kick us off. How do you approach your donors? What are some of the individualized ways in which you really connect with them and perhaps really dive into the importance of your work and the way you make your case relevant to your experience, to their experience? Tell us about it.
Yeah, I appreciate the question, and I'm gonna maybe toggle back and forth between just our work and our approach to advancement and fundraising. I think the difference between the Embrace as a monument and many other American monuments is that 4 of our 5 founders are Black folks. And so this is a monument dedicated to Black love. This couple, Dr. Mrs. King, who met here as college students. Additionally, we are also honoring 69 other Bostonians from 50s, 60s, and 70s, a diverse group of Black, Indigenous, Latino, Latinx, and Asian American, Jewish, and white activists who also worked during and worked for civil rights during that time. And so I think this notion of builders is important because, again, monuments are as much about the values of the people being memorialized as the individuals who are building the monuments. Most of the Confederate monuments were built between 1910 and 1930 by the Daughters of the American Confederacy. So you have this coalition of philanthropists dedicated to narrative building, creating these cell phone towers of hate for the purpose of proselytizing a message, right? And so I think this notion of trust is important in philanthropy, right? So I want to just take it back to our work. Over the course of this past few years in building this monument, I think I've listened to over 1,200 stories of Dr. King. And these stories are personal. They are meaningful. I think for many of us, I was born in 1973, so I never heard Dr. King speak live. My narrative of Dr. King was really from Mrs. King, who was really the steward of Dr. King's legacy and really the matriarch of the civil rights movement. And so this idea of listening, deep listening to people has been Embrace Boston. You can't run an organization called Embrace if you don't embrace people and do deep listening. And so I think there's a personal relationship in the way that we do philanthropy, both stewarding the philanthropy of community members as well as folks who have means to contribute. I think there's a level of accessibility. We see ourselves as concierge, almost like a hotel, concierge service. We have to open the door that's closest to the person that we're communicating with in order to get them to wherever they need to be. And it is not our job to spoon feed people into a context. And so I think we as fundraisers and philanthropists and stewards take that lesson seriously at our organization. This kind of radical concierge, radical listening approach to philanthropy.
Thank you, Dr. Murray. The word stewards really stood out. We hear that often. We use that often in our work with BIPOC communities. Thank you for sharing that. Priska, any thoughts?
Yeah, as a newer organization, as I was just listening to Dr. Imari, I was thinking about, what we're doing. We're sort of like building the plane as we're flying it, as they say. And I think for me, my number one goal right now is my founders, right? My founding board members. They're my constituency. They're my primary stakeholder because they're the ones that seeded the organization, and they're the ones whose friends and family helped us raise, a lot of money in the beginning. And so we want to make sure that they continue to believe in TAF. They continue to feel invested in TAF so that their support will continue. And they are my best ambassadors ultimately. And I think the trust for me is having them trust us, the team, doing the day-to-day work, and then for their friends to trust them. And so where I can put my board members and our other stakeholders and ambassadors in front of donors, that is sort of the best thing we can do for the Asian American Foundation. Because ultimately, I think what we're trying to do is build a community of philanthropists and community leaders who want to work together. So in the 3 years since TAF has been around, I think we've hosted just dozens of events, large events, small events. And the thing that I think we do really well is we bring people together and have them experience something that they've never experienced before. People really focusing and centering Asian American voices and histories and narratives, and feeling proud to do so, right? They love being in the room with my board members and other leaders. They love meeting the mayor of Boston and or someone at the White House and or a celebrity. And so I think at TAF right now, we're really focusing on cultivating the community, making sure that everyone who comes to a TAF event trusts us, trusts our board, trusts the team to sort of do the work. And I think right now, 3 years in, like I said, we're just getting started, but ultimately it's about building those relationships. And Rui, you know this better than anyone. Fundraising is about relationships. It's about sort of that one-on-one personal relationship. So as much as we can have all of those touch points, and Lena, I'm starting to believe it does take twice as much for the Asian American community. So that's a lot of work for us, but we're committed to it. And so whether it's an event, a one-on-one conversation, we're just trying to soak up all the lessons right now from all of you in order to do right by the community, because the last thing we want to do is lose this momentum. So I'm here to talk, but also to listen and learn from all of you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Priska. As I think about what everybody said, Woody, I would love your thoughts here, because I feel that the notion of trust, it's different for all communities. It's not the same for AAPI communities. The fact that how diverse AAPI community is, the idea of trust is very different as well. Can you talk a little bit about your experience, your lived experience, your take on this?
Yes, be happy to. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think that we have to go back. The legacy of slavery in the country has basically played a significant part. You saw some of this playing out during COVID, and so the question of how do I hold, what power do I have to hold people that I'm giving my money to accountable to do the work that I want to put my dollars against? I have invested and put money in a lot of different places. And I think to Dr. Silly's point about these networks, I'm generally investing or working or want to be on a board or will invest in a charitable cause if I see somebody on there that I know and that I trust and I believe share the understanding and commitment to the cause that I'm working against. Personally, I have been involved with the startup of some networks here, one of which is the Black Giving Circle that we have here that was started through the Greater Cincinnati Foundation. And it was brought together by some people who knew each other and took the leadership to say, our Black community is not given enough. We think that there's more that it can do, and we need to kind of bring folks together to set an example to try to attract more Black donors into the charitable giving. And it was led, it was put together, and it has grown, and it's been around for several years now, and we're hoping to make it even bigger. But that's an area that I chose because I chose to start because I worked with the person that started the organization, and I trusted her. So the accountability and things along that line, and I have other friends who are investing in places that and doing charitable work, and I know what their heart is, and this whole thing around personal relationships. If I trust them and build that relationship, then they're more likely going to get my money than someone who I don't know, and I'm just kind of putting in a place. Don't know people, don't have the accountability. I don't see people like me on the board of directors or in key leadership positions and things like that. All of those are factors that influence the trust consideration as far as my experience is concerned.
Thank you so much, Woody, for sharing that.
Sure.
Lena, I would love to get your thoughts, especially based on what Woody just has shared.
Yeah, I would love to share, and I love this conversation that we're having around trust. And just it sounds like a lot of what we're doing is also building, as we're around philanthropy, as this is very new for many of us and for communities of color. And just wanted to add, just in terms of for Asian Americans, one of the things that I've noticed, especially as I was executive director at KCF in San Francisco as well, is many of the donations and many of the mobilizing in terms of giving has occurred because there was already that existing trust within that community. And so what Priska was mentioning about just building that trust with the board members, they have the trust with those who actually have the ability to give. And so I think that has been years of work that has already been developed. But in terms of building trust with the Asian American donors, whom we may not know, who we're still in the process of building trust with. There's some things that I wanted to share in terms of what that actually entails. And one of them is just really understanding first and foremost the diversity of API communities. We are not a monolith community. I think there are 48 Asian countries and there's 44 European countries. And in the United States, I've heard many times like we say things like, oh, I love Asian food. You don't say, I love European food. You say, I love German food. I love French food. I love Italian food. And the number of Asian countries there are is the reason why we actually provide languages in 12 different languages. And one of the things that we have learned is that if you really want to work with some of these Asian American donors, is really understand their history. They are a country. We are not a monolith. And the other thing that I feel like is very important, especially amongst the Asian American community, that I have found that's a little bit different, and that's not formulaic in a sense. As we've been doing fundraising, there's been, the how-tos, right? The how to approach someone to ask to give and to provide like a list of giving opportunities and ask them directly, like, where do you see yourself? One of the things that we have found amongst Asian American communities is the art of indirectness, in a sense of when you approach an Asian American donor, it is not directly asking them sometimes. It is asking, do you have friends or do you have people who you think would fit into this area of giving? And if they really want to do it themselves, they will do it. They will respond. And I think that education around relationship building is very important. And the other thing that Prisca was mentioning was how many events that they do. And one of the things that we have found is events is that indirect way of building community. It is not a direct, hey, come here so we can ask you for more. It is, hey, let's get together to build a community. And in the process, this is our vision and this is what we're doing. And if you want to be a part of our community, we're more than welcome. We invite you to join into our community rather than making it transactional. And I think that relationship building is very important. One of the other things that I feel like is very important in terms of those indirect asks is giving is very new for Asian Americans here. We are one of the fastest growing populations, and there are many people who have done well and who are ready to give, but philanthropy is very, very new amongst Asian American communities. And so there's a bit of also lack of data around giving. And one of the ways that we have found that really help us is that many times it is that indirect. It is coming in and having that event. And many times what we have done is we're right now in the middle of a capital campaign. And we have held a few events, very small, much smaller events, where we've just said, hey, let's get together. Here's what we're doing. This is the first time they've heard about it. And one of the things that they will do is they will approach us and say, you know what, I'm interested in giving this amount. And there are people that we may not have known even have that capacity. And that's the one thing that we're learning is we're learning about people who may have capacity, they may not have been, and this is their first time giving. And the other thing that we talked about earlier was just the storytelling. I love what Dr. Mari is saying about just the narrative. And one of the things that we realized, especially amongst Asian Americans, is many of them that trust is because many in their 70s and 80s, they came to the United States because of a war or because they were escaping a dictatorship. And so that there is still that mentality of a bit of a scarcity in the sense of, I've spoken with donors who have said, I want to give more, but I'm so scared. Like, I'm so scared that if I give all of it, then I'm going to go, it's very subconscious. I'm going to go hungry again. And so there is that building of trust around that as well, because you want that security and that safety to be there. And so those are all some areas that I really feel like is important in terms of building trust.
Lina, thank you so much. I'm taking so much notes just based on what you shared, what everybody has said. In the interest of time, I want to say thank you all very much for joining us for such an engaging conversation. We would like to once again thank Dr. Una and her team at the Lilly Family School Philanthropy, everybody here on the screen, and especially subjects mentioned in the case studies. Thank you for joining. The recording will be sent to you in a few days, and this concludes our program. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you next time.